Imagine for just a second that you are sitting in a pitch black room.
Oh, this is the classic setup.
Right. You're tied to a chair, hand and foot, and your shoes, they've been meticulously traced onto these pieces of white paper, taped to the floor, making sure you can't move a single inch without someone knowing.
Which is such a terrifyingly specific detail.
It really is. So around you in this tight little circle, 4 people are sitting, and they're gripping each other's hands so tightly. I mean, their knuckles are white. The door to this room is heavily bolted from the inside. No windows.
Right, the absolute definition of an impenetrable sealed space.
Exactly. And then out of that suffocating darkness, you hear this sickening scream.
Yeah.
When the lights finally flicker on, the man sitting right in front of you, a man whose hands were supposedly held the entire time, well, he's dead. He's been stabbed directly through the heart.
Both doors still locked?
The door's still locked. Your shoe outlines are perfectly undisturbed. And every single person in that room swears on their life they never, ever let go of the hands they were holding.
It's just, it's a scenario that completely short-circuits the human brain. Your logical mind immediately screams that what just happened is impossible. Yeah. The physics of the space just do not allow for it.
Yep.
And yet, there is the body.
Exactly. And that friction, that massive sparks flying collision between what you know is physically possible and what you're staring at with your own 2 eyes, that is the lifeblood of the greatest magic tricks.
Oh, absolutely.
Usually when we talk about illusions, there's this unspoken contract between you and the performer. You watch them slide swords into the wooden box holding the assistant, and your logical brain is quietly saying, there are mirrors, there's a trap door.
Right, there's a hidden compartment.
Exactly. But your emotional brain is completely swept away. You desperately want to be fooled while simultaneously trying to crack the code. But, and this is the key when you step into the world of the Golden Age mystery, specifically the impossible crime, that wooden box isn't a stage prop.
It's a crime scene.
It's a crime scene. And the assistant hasn't vanished. They've been murdered. The author's looking you right in the eye and challenging you to solve a puzzle that defies reality itself.
Which transforms the act of reading, or in our case today, listening, into a highly combative battle of wits.
Yeah.
You aren't just a passive consumer of a narrative, You're engaging in a duel with the architect of the mystery.
Yeah.
And there's this profound, almost primal comfort when that impossible trick is finally explained, when the supernatural is just violently pulled back down to earth and grounded in perfectly rational mechanical physics.
Which is exactly what we are going to do today. So welcome to the Deep Dive, broadcasting to you at that cozy late-night feel of our little station here on Commercial Street in Atchison, Kansas, Chesterton Radio.
The perfect vibe for what we're covering.
It really is. We have an incredibly fascinating stack of sources to get through today. We are immersing ourselves in a collection of original, heavily annotated broadcast transcripts from the legendary 1940 CBS radio series Suspense.
Such a landmark show.
Yeah, but we aren't just looking at random episodes. We're zooming in on 6 brilliant scripts written or co-authored by the man universally acknowledged as the undisputed master of the locked room mystery, John Dickson Carr.
The absolute king.
Right. And our mission today is to reverse engineer the perfect mystery. We're going to rip the floorboards up, look at the wiring, and understand exactly how you create an atmosphere of suffocating supernatural terror.
How you construct that seemingly impossible physical puzzle.
Exactly. And then pull the rug out from under the audience with a solution so logical you want to kick yourself for not seeing it.
Well, to truly appreciate the gravity of Carr's work here, we have to establish the context of the golden age of detective fiction. When most people think of that era, roughly the 1920s through the late 1930s, they instantly think of Agatha Christie.
Right, of course.
Or they think of Dorothy L. Sayers, Margery Allingham, Ngaio Marsh, Ellery Queen. These writers were the foundational architects of the modern mystery puzzle. But they generally focused on the who and the why.
Yeah, Christie was a master of psychological misdirection and hidden identities. She'd give you 10 people on an island and ask you to figure out which one was secretly a psychopath.
Right, she was playing a game of social deduction. But Carr was playing a completely different sport.
Totally different.
John Dickson Carr carved out this highly specific, almost magical niche. While Christie gives you a brilliant twist of identity, Carr gives you a man walking into a snow-covered field, leaving only one set of footprints. and then being found shot at close range with no weapon and no other footprints around him.
It's just wild.
He built these puzzle box novels featuring these larger-than-life, incredibly eccentric detectives, like Dr. Gideon Fell, who, fun fact, was famously modeled after G.K. Chesterton.
Which we love here at Chesterton Radio.
Exactly. Or the booming, irascible Sir Henry Merivale. Carr's obsession was the how, not just the who. The how.
And this brings us to a really crucial concept for this entire deep dive, the fair play mystery.
Yes, the golden rule.
Right, the golden rule of the era. The author is absolutely required to present every single clue to the audience before the detective solves the case. No secret twins introduced in the final chapter.
No previously unmentioned poison darts from South America.
Exactly, no supernatural interventions.
Yeah.
It must be solvable by pure logic. And Carr, he was a militant defender of fair play. He viewed it as a sacred pact with the reader.
I love that about him. He's essentially saying, look, I am going to put all the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle face up on the table right in front of you, and I'm still going to beat you.
Yeah. And what makes this specific stack of sources so compelling is seeing how Carr translated that genius from the printed page into the medium of audio drama for CBS radio. We have to set the scene for you to understand how these stories were consumed.
It's so important to the experience.
Picture it. It's the early 1940s. The world is completely engulfed in the existential chaos and anxiety of World War II. Millions of Americans are tuned into their radios in their living rooms.
Yeah, there is this massive cultural appetite for mystery fiction, not just for thrills, but as a form of intellectual escapism.
Right. When the real world is chaotic and horrifyingly random, there's a deep psychological need for stories where the chaos is structured, where the violence has a logical explanation, and where a brilliant mind ultimately restores order.
So you would tune into Suspense, which was one of the most prestigious dramatic series on the air at the time, and you'd hear the iconic, ominous voice of the man in black introducing tales calculated to, as the intro always went, intrigue you, to stir your nerves, to offer you a precarious situation, and then withhold the solution until the last possible moment.
I can hear the voice in my head right now.
Right. Radio is the ultimate theater of the mind. And for a writer obsessed with the mechanics of the impossible, the acoustic medium presented unique challenges, but also incredible devious opportunities for manipulation.
It's so true. Reading through these broadcast transcripts, it's honestly like finding a master illusionist's secret notebook. You get to see exactly where the trapdoors are placed in the dialogue, how the Foley sound effects are used as misdirection, and how he manipulates the listener's assumptions.
It's brilliant.
So as we walk through these dark ocean liner corridors, these haunted English belfries, and these locked theater boxes today, I want you to play detective alongside us, because Carr is playing fair. The clues are right there in the audio landscape. Can you spot the detail that unravels the impossible before the final reveal?
Well, to start unraveling those impossibilities, we actually have to begin not with physics, but with psychology.
Oh, this is so good.
Because before Carr builds an impossible physical crime, he systematically traps his protagonist and, by extension, you, the listener, in an impossible mental state. The foundation of his physical illusions almost always relies on psychological isolation.
That is such a brilliant way to frame it. To make a physically impossible event seem terrifyingly plausible, you first have to make the protagonist doubt their own grip on reality.
Exactly.
You have to isolate them so completely that they have no one to verify their sanity. And there is absolutely no better example of this mechanism than our first script, the legendary Cabin B13.
Cabin B13 is widely considered a masterclass in atmospheric gaslighting. It strips away a character's environmental anchors so thoroughly that the listener feels the exact same vertigo the character does.
Yeah.
It isn't just a missing person story. It's a horror story about the overwhelming power of institutional authority denying your lived experience.
Let me lay out the brilliant setup for this one. So we open on a mild, foggy October night at a New York pier. We meet this young couple, Anne and Richard Brewster. They're deeply in love. They've been married for practically 5 hours.
The ink is barely dry on the certificate.
Right. And they're rushing up the gangplank to board this massive 25,000-ton luxury ocean liner, the Motorvania, for a lavish 3-month honeymoon in Europe. They board the ship. They find their beautiful, luxurious cabin down on B deck, cabin B13.
Okay, establishing the geography.
Exactly. After they settle in, Richard tells Anne he's going to run up to the purser's office on C deck to deposit $10,000 in cash they brought for the trip into the ship's safe. He kisses her, steps out the door, and vanishes.
Just gone. But the physical vanishing of the husband is merely the inciting incident.
Yeah.
What elevates this script into psychological terror is the systematic dismantling of Anne's reality that follows.
It's so frustrating to listen to in the best way.
Right. When Richard doesn't return, Anne goes looking for him. She can't find him, so she tries to return to her room. And she's stopped by the ship's doctor, a calm, authoritative Austrian named Dr. Paul Heinrich. Anne asks for directions back to cabin B13.
And what does he say?
Dr. Heinrich, with his polite, slightly condescending tone of a professional, tells her that there is no cabin B13 on the ship.
And naturally, she thinks he's just mistaken or pulling a bad joke because she was just sitting in it. She gives this incredibly detailed, frantic description to prove it. She says, I know what my cabin looks like. It's paneled in light oak. There's rosewood furniture. The beds are covered in yellow satin, and it has real square windows for portholes.
He has receipts.
Right. But Dr. Heinrich gently points out that many ocean liners, catering to human superstition, simply omit the number 13 on every deck. They jump straight from B12 to B14.
Which is a real thing.
It is. So Anne demands they go look. The doctor obliges. They walk down to B deck, they bring the floor stewardess into the conversation, and they look at the doors. And right there, in solid brass, it goes B12, B14. The stewardess confirms it with absolute certainty. There has never been a cabin B13 on the Motorvania.
This is where we need to look at the cognitive science behind what Carr is doing. Our brains rely heavily on environmental anchors, a door number, a specific hallway turn, the color of a carpet to maintain spatial awareness and a sense of continuity. When you remove or alter an anchor, the brain experiences immediate dissonance. And Carr uses the incredibly rigid, unquestionable hierarchy of a ship's crew to weaponize this dissonance against Anne.
It's terrifying.
It becomes one frantic, highly emotional young woman's memory, pitted against the calm, uniformed, professional certainty of the ship's doctor, the seasoned stewardess, and eventually the ship's captain himself.
The gaslighting is infuriating to listen to because it's so incredibly airtight. Every single time Anne offers a piece of tangible evidence that her husband exists and that she isn't crazy, the crew has a perfectly logical, devastating counter-explanation.
They bat it right down.
Like, for example, she says, look, I have luggage. We brought a steamer trunk and suitcases. The stewardess checks the ship's manifest and shakes her head. There is no luggage registered under the name Brewster. Then Anne suddenly remembers, wait, we just got married today? The tickets and luggage were booked under my maiden name, Marie Thornton, and the stewardess's face lights up and she says, oh yes, Miss Marie Thornton. 2 silk cases and a trunk. I unpacked them for you. In cabin B16.
Oh, it's so good.
They go to B16 and there is Anne's luggage. But there is absolutely no men's luggage, no shaving kit, no sign a man has ever been in the room.
And Carr tightens the noose by bringing in independent, neutral witnesses. They summon Second Officer Marshall. This is the man who was physically standing at the head of the gangplank checking tickets when Anne boarded. He has no reason to lie.
None at all.
And he swears on his Bible oath that he remembers Anne perfectly and that she boarded the ship entirely alone. There was no gentleman with her. Captain Wainwright points out that she has no joint passport, she has no relatives to call to verify the marriage, and in her panicked state, she can't even remember the name of the obscure upstate New York town where they supposedly eloped that morning.
Anne is completely cornered. Her identity is evaporating, and this is where the script gets genuinely brilliant. Carr introduces a psychological framework early on to make the listener doubt Anne as well.
Yes, the foreshadowing.
While they're still on the pier in the opening scene, Anne is acting nervous. She literally foreshadows her own nightmare. She tells Richard a story she's been obsessing over, something she calls the old Paris exposition story.
I love this legend.
I want to explain this because it's a legendary urban myth that actually existed long before this radio play. The legend goes that a mother and daughter arrive at a luxury hotel in Paris during the Great Exposition. The daughter leaves the hotel for a few hours. When she returns, her mother is gone.
Just vanished.
Vanished. And the hotel room has completely different wallpaper and furniture. The proprietor and the staff swear the girl arrived alone, that they have never seen her mother. The police think she's insane, and she nearly goes mad. Ultimately, years later, it turns out the mother had contracted a highly contagious strain of the bubonic plague. She died shortly after arriving, and the hotel owners, terrified that a plague outbreak would ruin the Paris Exposition and bankrupt the city, disposed of the body, completely renovated the room in an hour, and bought off the entire staff to gaslight the daughter.
It is a terrifying premise because it suggests a massive, flawlessly executed conspiracy acting against one insignificant individual for the sake of institutional preservation.
Exactly. So Anne, trapped on the ship, throws this exact legend right in the faces of the captain and the doctor. She hysterically accuses them of running the Paris trick on her. She screams that they must have found something wrong with Richard and they are covering it up to protect the cruise line.
Which sounds crazy to them.
Right, because Captain Wainwright, representing the voice of hard reality, points out the sheer absurdity of her accusation. He says, "Who said anything about the bubonic plague? This isn't 19th century Paris. Why on earth would the entire crew of a modern, massive ocean liner, a multinational corporation, conspire to convince one random young woman that her husband doesn't exist? What possible motive could they have?"
And that is the crux of the listener's dilemma. I mean, we heard Richard in the opening scene. We know, theoretically, that he exists. But the physical and testimonial evidence stacked against Anne is so overwhelmingly watertight that we are forced to wonder if the entire opening scene was an unreliable narrator situation.
Yeah, were we just hearing her delusion?
Exactly. Was it entirely constructed from Anne's fractured perspective? The script explicitly mentions she's recovering from a severe nervous breakdown, or brain fever. So the listener is caught in this tug-of-war between their empathy for the protagonist and the undeniable logic of the environment.
But wait, I have to jump in here and push back on the nature of this trope. Looking at this purely as a narrative device for entertainment, I mean, isn't this just an incredibly cruel, extended prank on a traumatized woman?
That's a fair point.
We are listening to a woman recovering from a mental illness being systematically tortured and driven to the brink of suicide by institutional gaslighting. Why is this considered an entertaining mystery?
That is a very astute question, and it really cuts to the heart of why psychological thrillers function. It's entertaining precisely because it taps into a primal, universal human fear. We all have a deep-seated terror of a sudden loss of identity, of cognitive decline, or of the terrifying powerlessness we'd feel if every authority figure around us looked us in the eye and denied our lived reality.
That makes a lot of sense. It's playing on our worst nightmares.
Right. Carr is taking that universal fear and pushing the psychological tension to the absolute breaking point. The entertainment value lies not in the torture, but in the eventual massive cathartic relief when the truth is finally revealed and her sanity is validated.
And the rational explanation they arrive at is so elegantly simple. It isn't a massive ship-wide conspiracy. It's grounded entirely in one of the most basic human flaws: simple greed. Dr. Heinrich, who's been quietly observing Anne, realizes her panic is too genuine. She isn't exhibiting the specific clinical traits of a true psychopath or compulsive liar. He trusts his medical intuition over the physical evidence. He deduces the only logical motive for this elaborate trick is the $10,000 in cash she mentioned.
Precisely. Once you establish the motive money, the impossible mechanics of the vanishing act snap into clear, logical focus. Dr. Heinrich realizes that Richard, the man Anne married that morning, never actually existed as a civilian.
Let me break down how this brilliant trick was pulled off. The man Anne knew as Richard Brewster was actually the first officer of the Motorvania, a man named Blaney.
An inside job.
Completely. Blaney had faked an American accent, wooed this wealthy, mentally fragile woman while he was on shore leave, and set up a fake marriage specifically to steal that $10,000, which he fully intended to take back to his real wife in England.
It relies on exploiting Anne's lack of familiarity with the ship and the crew. Blaney boards the ship with her, disguised in his civilian clothes. He knows the ship layout perfectly.
Right, so he walks her down to B deck, to an empty, luxurious cabin, likely B-16, where he had already instructed the stewardess to put her bags. Before they got there, he simply took a brass dummy plate that said B-13 and hung it over the slot on the door of B-16.
So simple.
It really is. He leaves her in the room, supposedly to go to the purser's office. He takes her $10,000. Once outside, he simply pulls the dummy B-13 plate off the door, walks to his own quarters, changes into his first officer uniform, and seamlessly blends back into the ship's crew.
The genius of Carr's plotting here is how this one simple mechanical trick, the fake door plate, perfectly explains the behavior of the entire crew without requiring a conspiracy. The crew wasn't lying. They were telling the truth based on their flawed perception.
Right.
Second Officer Marshall did tell the truth. He saw Anne come up the gangplank alone, and he saw a ship's officer loitering slightly behind her, returning from shore leave in civilian clothes. He just never logically associated the officer with Anne.
And Captain Wainwright was telling the truth, too. He mentioned earlier that the first officer came aboard with a terrible attack of the flu. That was Blaney's brilliant excuse to stay locked in his officers' quarters for the entire voyage, ensuring Anne would never accidentally spot him walking the decks in his uniform.
It's just perfectly orchestrated.
And Blaney's ultimate goal was so insidious. He didn't just want her money. He wanted to push her fragile mental state so far over the edge that she would jump overboard in despair, making it look like a tragic suicide brought on by a sudden relapse of madness. No body, no crime, and he keeps the cash. It's a flawless integration of a physical magic trick, the swap door number, and psychological warfare.
It perfectly bridges the gap between the seemingly impossible and grimly realistic human behavior. The listener experiences the terror of the supernatural, followed by the immense satisfaction of a logical deduction. And that transition from manipulating a character's mind to manipulating the physical environment leads us perfectly into the next script in our stack.
Oh, this one is so...
If Cabin B13 made us doubt the protagonist's sanity, The Man Without a Body makes us doubt the fundamental laws of physics.
Yes. We're moving from a vanishing cabin to a vanishing body. Let's unpack the incredible Gothic atmosphere of this one. We're leaving the claustrophobia of the ocean liner and traveling to the quaint, ancient English village of Aldbridge in Suffolk, right near the freezing North Sea.
Carr is a master at painting these settings.
He really is. You can practically smell the salt air and the thatched roofs.
It is the quintessential English village, heavily romanticized, but grounded in the grim reality of World War II. You have rolling grain fields, ancient hedgerows, and a massive, gloomy 14th century church called St. Luke's, famous for its heavy bells.
But Carr immediately shatters this idyllic postcard setting by opening the broadcast with a terrifying news dispatch. The village is under siege by a reign of terror involving what appears to be a literal invisible man.
The setup is incredibly vivid, and it plays right into the acoustics of radio. We follow the local clergyman, the Reverend Arthur Morley, and his daughter Janice. They're taking a walk in the evening past a rented cottage occupied by a very reclusive, elderly American inventor named Professor Ann Smith.
And they look through the window, right?
Yes. They look through the uncurtained, brightly lit window and witness something that absolutely defies logic. On a small, three-legged round table sits a heavy, old-fashioned gramophone, playing a loud, scratchy record. Beside the gramophone, resting on the table, are a pair of thick, white cotton gardening gloves.
Okay, spooky but not impossible yet.
Just wait. As the spring on the gramophone begins to run down and the music slows, Reverend Morley and Janice watch in absolute horror as the white gloves literally get up off the table by themselves.
Just floating there.
They inflate as if invisible hands have slipped into them. The left glove presses down on the machine to steady it, and the right glove firmly grasps the little crank and winds it up. Then, the gloves pull back and hang suspended in the empty air, keeping perfect time to the music.
It's such a great visual, or, audio visual.
What is truly fascinating here, from a structural standpoint, is Carr's reliance on specific, mundane mechanical details, even when describing a supernatural event. He doesn't just say, a ghost played the music or the machine wound itself. He explicitly describes the precise physical actions of the disembodied gloves.
Pushing down to gain leverage.
Exactly.
Yeah.
For a savvy listener, this is a massive glowing clue. A true ethereal spirit wouldn't need to exert physical leverage to turn a crank handle. The highly physical mechanical nature of the haunting immediately suggests an optical illusion or a stage trick rather than a genuine phantom.
But Carr knows he needs to escalate the terror. A visual parlor trick with floating gloves is creepy, but it isn't deadly. The violence escalates rapidly that very night.
Back to St. Luke's.
Right. St. Luke's Church has a massive multi-ton bell in its belfry tower. Suddenly, in the dead of night, the bell starts ringing violently on its own. The head verger, a tough, practical, no-nonsense local man named Emmett, grabs a lantern and runs up the narrow winding stone stairs to the belfry to stop it.
He's going right into the danger.
He sees the heavy rope pulling itself up and down. He rushes across the stone floor toward the swinging bell, and he is suddenly struck by what he later describes as a gigantic invisible fist or a sledgehammer blow right in the chest.
Just wrecks him.
This invisible kinetic force physically lifts a grown man off his feet and hurls him backward out of the open belfry window. Emmett only survives because he miraculously crashes into the branches of a large yew tree below. The village is completely terrified. They're ready to form a mob with pitchforks and torches and burn down Professor Smith's cottage.
So we are presented with two distinct impossible events that seem completely unrelated in their mechanics. First, you have a visual impossibility, the floating gloves winding a delicate machine. Second, you have a physical kinetic impossibility, an invisible force in an empty stone tower capable of throwing a heavy man out a window.
And true to his fair play doctrine, Carr provides incredibly satisfying, deeply practical explanations for both, rooted firmly in the actual technology and physical environment of 1940s wartime England.
Let's break down the mechanics, starting with the gloves. How on earth do you make a pair of heavy cotton gloves float in midair and wind a crank right in front of a brightly lit window?
Yeah, without wires.
It relies on one of the oldest, most reliable stage illusions in existence, specifically credited in Carr's script to a Victorian innovator named Colonel Stoddart at the London Polytechnic, though it draws heavily on the principles of Pepper's Ghost. It's an optical trick using the geometry of mirrors. Remember the specific detail about the furniture. The gramophone is sitting on a small, three-legged table.
Yes, 3 legs, not 4. That's a very specific detail.
Exactly. The table is positioned so that one leg points directly toward the window where the witnesses are standing, forming a triangle. The trick involves fitting 2 perfectly cut panels of looking-glass mirrors between the front leg and the 2 back legs, angled at roughly 45 degrees.
Ah, I see. So when the Reverend and his daughter look through the window, they think they're looking directly under the table to the back wall of the room. But because of the angle of the mirrors, they're actually seeing the side walls of the room reflected back at them.
Bingo.
If the side walls look exactly like the back wall, same wallpaper, same baseboards, the brain seamlessly stitches the image together.
It creates a massive visual blind spot, a wedge of invisible space directly behind the table. A person can comfortably sit cross-legged behind those mirrors, completely hidden from the waist down. They reach their arms up through a hidden sliding panel in the tabletop, put their hands into the white gloves resting there, and operate the gramophone.
That's wild.
Against the dim lighting of the room behind the bright table, and framed by the window, the illusion of disembodied floating hands is absolutely perfect.
To put it in modern terms for our listeners, it's the exact same optical trick they use at Disney's Haunted Mansion to make the ghosts dance in the ballroom, or the way a modern teleprompter reflects text on a piece of clear glass that the camera can't see. It's geometry and light.
Exactly right.
Okay, so that perfectly explains the visual trick. But you can't use a mirror to throw a 200-pound man out of a church tower. What about the giant invisible hand in the belfry?
For that, you need sheer, overwhelming kinetic force. And this is where Carr masterfully weaves the grim reality of the World War II home front into his puzzle. What is happening in England at this time? They're constantly preparing for German bombing raids.
Right.
A local builder in the village, a man named George Wellman, has a government contract to construct reinforced concrete air raid shelters along the nearby seawall. To build these, he is using heavy industrial riveting machines driven by massive air compressors.
Oh, wow, I see where this is going.
Yes. Under the cover of darkness, someone secretly ran a long, heavy-duty rubber compressed air pipe from one of those industrial riveting machines, snaked it across the graveyard, and ran it all the way up the stone wall and into the belfry tower, pointing it directly at the bell mechanism.
It's essentially a massive industrial-grade invisible air cannon.
Precisely. It was operated via a valve from the ground outside, completely out of sight. The operator opens the valve, and bursts of compressed air carrying hundreds of pounds of pressure hit the bell, making it swing wildly.
And then Emmett runs in.
When Emmett, the verger, rushed into the tower and ran toward the bell, he crossed directly in front of the nozzle. The operator on the ground hit him with a sustained blast of compressed air. It hit him with the blunt force of a sledgehammer, literally blowing him right out the window.
The mechanics of that are so brilliant because they use the mundane noise and machinery of wartime construction to mask the trick. But I have to bring up something that's been bugging me about the plot itself.
Go for it.
This whole setup sounds exactly like a classic Scooby-Doo villain. You know the trope the greedy amusement park owner puts on a glowing diver suit and uses a ridiculously complicated system of pulleys and holograms just to scare some teenagers away so he can look for pirate treasure.
Right, the I would have gotten away with it too guy.
Exactly. Why on earth would anyone go to this immense risky trouble with antique stage mirrors and industrial compressed air just to scare people in a village? Wouldn't it be immensely easier for a villain to just hide in the woods?
It is a completely valid observation, and it highlights why Carr is a master. He anticipates that exact criticism from the listener, and he resolves it by completely subverting the entire haunted village trope.
How so?
The people executing these terrifying tricks, the ones operating the air cannon and hiding behind the mirrors, are the local village doctor, Jim Norwood, and the builder, George Wellman. But they aren't the villains of the story. They are the heroes.
Wait, the heroes are the ones terrorizing the village.
Yes, they fabricated the entire myth of the Invisible Man for a highly specific tactical reason.
Yeah.
To expose the real villain, Professor Ann Smith. Dr. Norwood is a very observant man. Before the war, he studied medicine in Germany, and to pay his way, he spent a lot of time hanging around backstage at the Winter Garden Theater in Berlin, soaking up knowledge about grand stage illusions.
Ah, I love a good backstory.
When he sees Professor Smith in the village, he recognizes her. She isn't an elderly American woman at all. She is Karl Heinrich von Keith, a celebrated, highly dangerous German stage magician and camouflage expert who used to perform in Berlin.
A spy.
Yes. Von Keith is in the English village in drag, secretly surveying the area to find a hidden British camouflage aerodrome for the Luftwaffe.
That is an incredible double cross. So Dr. Norwood and the builder essentially weaponize Von Keith's own theatrical logic against him. They know they can't just go to the police with a hunch. They need proof. So they create an impossible situation to force his hand.
Right. They know that Von Keith, being a master illusionist with a massive ego, won't be able to resist analyzing a magic trick.
Of course he wouldn't.
When the angry mob corners Von Keith in the cottage, he panics. To prove he isn't a ghost, he loudly and arrogantly explains exactly how the mirror trick under the table works. And by explaining the trick so flawlessly, with the precise technical vocabulary of a stage magician, Von Keith accidentally blows his own cover. The local heroes outmagic the master magician.
It is a beautiful, intricate narrative construction. It completely satisfies the listener's desire for a creepy, supernatural atmosphere, but delivers a flawlessly rational, fair-play solution that ties the characters' backgrounds directly into the high-stakes wartime espionage setting.
Which perfectly transitions us into the third area of our deep dive. We've seen how to fake a ghost, and we've seen how to make a cabin vanish. Now we are going to look at the holy grail of John Dickson Carr's career. How to commit a brutal murder in front of an audience without a single person seeing a thing.
Yes, this is the classic locked room.
The locked room mystery is the purest, most demanding form of the impossible crime. It requires the author to act as an architect, constructing an airtight, three-dimensional physical puzzle. The rules are incredibly strict and unforgiving. The room must be completely sealed from the inside, the victim must be dead, and the killer, and often the weapon, must be inexplicably gone or proven entirely incapable of the act.
We have two incredible scripts to look at here, and they take completely opposite approaches to the locked room. Let's start with a script called The Moment of Darkness.
Oh, this is the one from the intro.
It is. We are in the lavish Villa Bijou in Monte Carlo, looking out over the moonlit Mediterranean Sea. A wealthy, highly susceptible, grieving widow named Anne Hester has fallen under the complete influence of a swarthy, intense, incredibly creepy mystic named Georges Revel. And for you classic film fans out there, Revel was played in the original broadcast by the legendary Peter Lorre, bringing his signature whispering menace to the role.
You couldn't have cast it better. And Hester's young lawyer, a pragmatic, cynical man named Alex Stevens, is furious. He believes, quite rationally, that Revel is a complete fraud, a charlatan actively bleeding Hester dry through emotional blackmail.
So he wants to expose him.
Stevens publicly challenges Revel to conduct a seance under the strictest possible scientific controls to prove once and for all that the so-called supernatural phenomena are faked.
The setup for this impossible crime is incredibly meticulous. Carr wants you to know there are no trapdoors here. They go up to a small, bare, windowless room at the top of the villa. The heavy oak door is firmly bolted on the inside. Stevens, the skeptic, volunteers to be the control subject.
He's the one we talked about, tied to the chair.
Right. He is tied tightly to a heavy chair, hand and foot, with thick rope. But that isn't enough. To prove he doesn't slip out of his bonds in the dark, they place pieces of crisp white paper under the soles of his shoes, and they take a heavy pencil and trace the exact outline of his shoes.
So clever.
If he moves a fraction of an inch, the outlines will misalign. Then the other four people in the room, the medium Revel, Anne Hester, her niece Margery, and a family friend named Ken Blake, sit in a tight circle around a small table in the center of the room. They reach out and clasp each other's hands firmly. The lights are turned completely off. It is pitch black.
The physical constraints laid out for the listener are absolute. The door is bolted from the inside. The victim is heavily immobilized. And most importantly, the four suspects are physically, tangibly linked to each other. Theoretically, this makes it utterly impossible for any single person in the circle to move, reach for a weapon, or stand up without the people holding their hands immediately noticing.
They sit in the stifling darkness. Suddenly, a horrible, choking scream rips through the silence. Someone fumbles for the switch. When the harsh lights go up, they find a nightmare. Stevens is dead.
Stabbed through the heart.
Yes, violently, directly through the heart with a heavy dagger. The weapon is left sticking out of his chest. But here's the bizarre, glowing clue that Carr drops right in our laps. Right next to the dagger hilt on Stevens' dark coat is a glowing, smeared spot of luminous paint.
The paint is such a great detail.
But the door is still bolted. Stevens' shoe outlines on the paper are perfectly undisturbed, and all four people in the circle swear, screaming in panic, that they never let go of each other's hands for a single second.
This is a textbook Carr setup. It seems completely insoluble. And the solution relies on breaking down our deeply held assumptions about sensory evidence, particularly how our brains process information in complete darkness.
The brilliant reveal actually comes from the medium, Ravel, who turns out not to be a fraudulent mystic at all, but rather Monsieur Flamand, the brilliant head of the French Sûreté Detective Bureau, who is working deep undercover. So, how does Flamand explain the impossible mechanics of this room?
He starts by dismantling the tracing trick, which is a classic piece of parlor magic. How does a fake medium escape his rope bonds, walk around a room to cause mischief, and return to his chair without disturbing the precise pencil outlines of his shoes?
It seems like you couldn't.
The answer is embarrassingly simple. He doesn't try to line his shoes back up with the original tracing. He simply picks up the pieces of paper, turns them completely over to the blank reverse side, sets his feet down, and takes a pencil from his pocket to trace a brand new outline around his shoes in their new position.
Oh, that's infuriatingly simple.
When the lights come up, everyone sees a perfect outline and assumes they're looking at the original tracing. It's a cognitive blind spot. People rarely check the back of the paper.
Okay, that explains how a medium could move. But Stevens was the one tied up, and he was the victim. The real impossibility is the murder itself. How do you precisely stab a man through the heart in pitch darkness when you are supposedly holding someone else's hand on both sides?
Flamen reveals that the fundamental premise of the question is flawed. The chain was broken. One person in that circle absolutely did let go.
It was Aunt Hester, the grieving widow.
Exactly. Aunt Hester was the cold-blooded killer. But how did she see her target in the pitch dark? Carr laid the groundwork for this earlier with the luminous paint. Before the lights went out when they were eating dinner, Stevens had accidentally spilled some soup on his jacket. He pulled out a handkerchief to dab at it.
And Hester had tampered with it.
Aunt Hester had previously stolen a vial of highly luminous paint used for painting clock dials. She had soaked that handkerchief in the invisible fluid. When Stevens wiped his chest, he unknowingly painted a glowing bullseye directly over his own heart.
That is so deeply sinister. So when the lights went out, Aunt Hester simply let go of the hands of the two people sitting next to her. She leaned silently across the small space in the pitch darkness, saw the glowing spot hovering in the blackness, and used it as a perfect target to drive the dagger home.
But this raises the ultimate question. If she let go, wouldn't the people sitting next to her, Ravel and Margery, immediately know she let go? Why on earth didn't they shout, "Hester, just let go of my hand"?
Because they did shout. But their assumptions completely blinded them to the reality of what happened. This is where Carr's mastery of the audio medium truly shines. Think about the sequence of events. They are sitting in silence. Then a terrifying scream happens. When the scream happens, Margery realizes she isn't holding her aunt's hand, and Ravel realizes he isn't holding her hand either. But they were sitting in a circle. In an audio drama, when a murder happens in the dark and you hear a scream, the listener automatically assumes the scream came from the victim, Stevens, realizing he is about to die. But wait. Stevens was stabbed directly through the heart with a heavy blade. He died instantly. His lungs would have collapsed. He physically couldn't have screamed.
The killer screams.
Yes. Aunt Hester, the sweet old widow, uttered that appalling, blood-curdling scream herself. She did it to create a massive psychological distraction and to completely mask the physical sound of her own movement. She screamed, leaned over, stabbed him, and violently grabbed the hands of the people next to her again, just as the lights were coming on.
The confusion of the sudden darkness, the paralyzing shock of the deafening scream, and the immediate return of physical contact made that brief, one-second disconnection feel like a panicked, involuntary reflex rather than a deliberate, murderous action. The people next to her assumed they all just flinched and dropped hands because of Stevens' scream. They reconstructed the timeline in their heads incorrectly.
That is an incredibly clever use of sensory deprivation. The darkness isn't just there for spooky atmosphere. It is the actual mechanical mechanism that makes the crime possible. It obscures both vision and memory. Now, I want to sharply contrast that intimate, pitch-black seance room with our second locked room scenario, a script called Fireburn and Cauldron Bubble. Because this murder happens in a massive public space, in full view of an audience.
Yes, we are shifting from the suffocating darkness of a sealed room in Monte Carlo to the sweeping, brightly lit, massive public arena of the Drury Lane Theatre in London. It is a highly anticipated opening night performance of Shakespeare's Macbeth.
We have a retired, legendary, and highly vain actress named Margery Allingham. She is watching the play from the most exclusive spot in the house, Box D, suspended high above the stage. She's extremely paranoid, so the heavy mahogany door to her box is physically guarded in the corridor outside by a massive ex-wrestler and her devoted personal secretary. No one can get past them.
A literal fortress.
Furthermore, the box directly below hers on the lower tier is completely empty. She is sitting in the box entirely alone. And yet, during the climax of the play, she is found dead. She has been brutally stabbed straight through the right eye and into her brain. But here is the impossible puzzle. There is absolutely no weapon left in the wound. The police search the box top to bottom. There is no weapon anywhere in the box.
The physical constraints here are entirely different from the seance room, but equally impenetrable. The space isn't sealed by a locked wooden door. It is sealed by a massive web of sightlines. There are 3,000 people in the theater auditorium looking toward the stage.
Right.
The corridor door is heavily guarded by a professional. A circus acrobat couldn't possibly climb up the velvet drapes from the empty box below without hundreds of people in the stalls seeing him.
And the brilliant solution here relies on a pure physical mechanism, a literal murder machine. The detective figures out that her husband, a calculating man named Howard White, killed her to inherit her vast fortune. But how did he physically execute the murder without being anywhere near the box when it happened?
He didn't use a blowgun, he didn't throw a knife from the rafters, and he didn't use a secret trapdoor. He used a psychological weakness to deliver a seemingly innocuous object that contained its own fatal mechanism.
The opera glasses.
Exactly. Howard White knew two crucial things about his wife. First, she was extremely nearsighted. Second, she was incredibly pathologically vain about her appearance. She absolutely refused to wear regular prescription eyeglasses in public, especially at a highly photographed society premiere.
Naturally.
So just before he left her alone in the box, before the play started, he gifted her a heavy, ornate pair of anniversary opera glasses.
But these were not ordinary mother-of-pearl opera glasses. They were a custom, deadly device originally invented by a French assassin. When Marcia lifted the heavy glasses to her face to watch the stage, the lenses were blurry. She naturally reached up to turn the small, knurled focus wheel in the center to adjust the sight.
Like you would with any binoculars.
But that wheel was actually a mechanical trigger. Turning it released a powerful spring-loaded, razor-sharp steel blade hidden inside the tube that shot directly through the lens, through her right eye, and deep into her brain. She died silently and instantly.
And here is where the vanishing weapon aspect of the locked room is solved so elegantly by simple gravity. Because she was naturally leaning forward over the velvet rail of the box to look down at the stage, when she died, her hands went slack.
Oh, man.
The heavy modified brass opera glasses simply fell from her hands, dropped straight over the rail, and landed softly on the carpet in the empty box directly below her.
A box that Howard White had specifically reserved months in advance under a fake name and intentionally left empty for this exact ballistic purpose. He simply waited for the chaos of the murder discovery, slipped quietly into that empty box in the darkness of the theater, picked up the murder weapon, put it in his pocket, and walked out.
It is a breathtakingly cruel and efficient mechanism.
But I have to push back a little here on behalf of the listener. I notice a very dark thematic thread running through both of these locked room stories. The killer consistently weaponizes the victim's own traits or their specific environment against them. In the seance, Stephen's own dropped soup and the darkness protect Hester. In the theater, Marcia's vanity literally kills her.
It's a common Carr motif, yes.
But my critique is this. Isn't a pair of spring-loaded, blade-shooting opera glasses a bit too, James Bond gadget for a classic mystery? Doesn't relying on a secret, custom-built mechanical assassin's tool border on cheating the audience out of a fair deduction?
It is a very fair criticism, and one that critics of the Golden Age often levy. However, I will passionately defend the fair play nature of Carr's device in this specific script. Carr does not cheat the listener. He plants vital linguistic clues right in the dialogue. Let's look at the interaction in the box before he leaves. Howard hands her a small package and says, "If you'll accept these, madam, in honor of our first anniversary." And Marcy replies warmly, "Howard, they're lovely. Of course I'll accept them."
Ah, I see. He doesn't say, accept this necklace or this corsage. He says these. A plural noun for a singular object, like a pair of pants or a pair of glasses.
Exactly. It's a grammatical clue. Later, the police inspector interrogates the secretary outside the door. He asks what Howard gave her, and the secretary, who didn't see inside the box, assumes it was a traditional gift. She says, "Oh, probably a corsage of flowers."
But the inspector knows better.
Right. The inspector immediately points out that there were no flowers found anywhere in the box and no pin marks on her dress. The clue to the missing object is right there in the specific phrasing. Furthermore, Carr spends a significant portion of the script's first act establishing Marcia's overwhelming vanity regarding her eyes. We learn that her first husband had a weird obsession with painting her eyes and that she vehemently refuses to wear her thick glasses.
So it was set up.
The locked room isn't solved by an unfair, previously unmentioned secret passage in the wall. It is solved by combining the physics of a spring-loaded trap with the heavily broadcast psychology of the victim's vanity. The puzzle pieces are all visible. You just have to assemble them.
That is a brilliant defense, and it is a perfect segue into our final segment, the ultimate misdirection, or twisting the listener's perspective. In our final two stories, the mystery evolves. It isn't just about how a physical crime was committed by a character, but how the author actively, aggressively manipulates the listener's inherent assumptions about time, space, and even the identity of the narrator themselves.
We are moving from the manipulation of characters within the narrative to the direct, fourth wall-breaking manipulation of the audience listening to the radio broadcast in their living rooms.
Let's look at a breathless thriller called Death Flies Blind. We are aboard a state-of-the-art commercial passenger plane flying from New York to Los Angeles. A young, brilliant naval officer, Commander Fred Onslow, and his beautiful fiancée Monica are aboard. Also on board is a notoriously wealthy, paranoid industrialist named Silas Naylor, surrounded by his hulking bodyguards.
High stakes up in the air.
Suddenly, deep into the night flight, the plane hits massive turbulence. They break down the cockpit door and discover a terrifying reality. The pilots have vanished.
It is a classic locked room scenario, but in terrifying motion. A sealed metal tube flying at 200 miles an hour in the sky. The passengers realize they have been hijacked in a highly sophisticated plot. The fake pilots lock the controls, set the plane on a gyroscopic autopilot heading out over the freezing Atlantic Ocean, and bailed out with parachutes.
They find a torn piece of paper left behind in the cockpit with frantic German handwriting on it. A translator on board reads it. It's instructions for the hijackers, indicating that based on the fuel gauge, the plane will run completely out of gas and crash into the ocean at exactly 7:00 a.m.
The tension is incredible. They're flying blind through a massive, howling storm system over the Atlantic. The radio is dead. They can't change the autopilot without tearing the plane apart.
Just waiting to die.
As the dark hours tick by, they're just sitting there listening to the drone of the engines, waiting for them to choke, sputter, and die.
Oh.
The clock on the wall says 1:55 a.m. They think they have 5 agonizing hours left to pray or panic. But then Silas Naylor looks out the small window and notices something impossible. The black sky is turning gray. It's getting daylight outside.
At 2 a.m.
He looks at his watch and says, "This is impossible. It's only 5 minutes to 2 o'clock in the morning." And Commander Onslow, who has been quietly doing math in the corner, replies very calmly, "I beg your pardon, old man. It's 5 minutes to 7 o'clock.
And this is the brilliant spatial and temporal trick of the episode.
Right. Onslow, being a trained naval navigator, realizes the massive time zone shift. They aren't flying west to Los Angeles. The hijackers turn the plane east. The Earth rotates. European time is roughly 5 hours ahead of New York Eastern Standard Time.
So they aren't over the ocean anymore.
The German instructions on the torn paper, "You should land just as your fuel fails at 7 a.m., weren't referring to 7 a.m. New York time over the middle of the empty ocean. They were referring to 7:20 a.m. European time over solid land.
The German spy aboard, turns out to be Naylor's own mousy, unassuming secretary, Shepard, suddenly pulls a gun. He thinks he's successfully delivered the passengers, the plane, and Naylor's highly classified submarine secrets directly into the hands of the Third Reich. He takes over the manual controls as the fuel runs out, completely confident they're descending through the clouds into a military airstrip in Nazi Germany.
But then, Carr delivers the ultimate double-cross. Shepard wrestles the plane to a rough landing. He throws open the heavy metal hatch and shouts triumphantly to the armed men running toward the plane in German. And a rough voice calls back from the fog, English. Why the bloody hell are you speaking English?
The relief is palpable. Onslow, during the long, terrifying night while the spy was distracted holding them hostage, had secretly crawled under the dash and altered the magnetic navigation instruments. He tweaked the compass heading just enough so that when the fuel ran out precisely at 7 a.m. European time, they didn't land in Germany. They had veered slightly north and landed safely on a Royal Air Force base in England.
It is a brilliant, entirely logical deduction based purely on the inflexible math of geography and time zones. The characters, and by extension, the listener, assume the primary threat is running out of fuel and drowning in the ocean.
That's what you would assume.
But the real hidden threat was arriving perfectly on time at a hostile destination. By realizing the true nature of the temporal timeline, Onslow subverts the trap.
And that kind of structural subversion, forcing the listener to make a massive incorrect assumption based on how information is presented, reaches its absolute breathtaking zenith in the final script we are analyzing today. Mr. Markham, antique dealer. I have to say, this is arguably the most audacious piece of narrative trickery in the entire Suspense collection.
Oh, without a doubt. It is a masterclass in exploiting the specific vulnerabilities of the audio medium.
This one completely blew my mind. Let me set it up carefully. We are in a dingy, incredibly cluttered antique shop in London, filled with the ticking of dozens of clocks. Charles Markham is the antique dealer, but he openly, gleefully admits to his terrified clients that his real, highly lucrative profession is blackmail. He is a ruthless, hateful, deeply sadistic man.
Just a truly awful person. A desperate young woman named Judith Ray comes to his shop late at night. She is begging him for mercy because he is blackmailing her over a minor youthful criminal record that would ruin her upcoming marriage.
And then her fiancé shows up.
Her fiancé, a hot-headed young man named Ronald Gilbert, bursts into the shop with a loaded gun. He demands the evidence. Markham just laughs at them. He taunts them mercilessly. He feels completely secure in his power. Ronald, pushed entirely to the breaking point of human endurance, raises the gun and fires.
We, the listeners, hear the deafening crack of the gunshot. Ronald gasps. He says the bullet passed clean through Markham's chest, right through his heart, and shattered the glass face of a tall grandfather clock standing directly behind the desk. Markham slumps over dead. Judith and Ronald panic. They quickly hide Markham's bleeding body under a heavy canvas dust cover on a chair in the corner.
And then the massive complication arrives. Just moments later, a man casually walks in the front door of the shop who sounds exactly like Charles Markham. It is his identical twin brother, Robert.
Of course it's a twin.
Robert is sharper, perhaps even colder. He quickly deduces what has happened. He smells the cordite. He finds the fresh bullet scratches on the mahogany desk, and he notices the dark blood slowly seeping through the canvas dust cover. He confronts them. He realizes Ronald murdered his brother.
But Robert isn't sad. He actually hated his brother. He realizes, in a flash of sociopathic brilliance, that he can use this horrific situation to his immense advantage. He decides he will simply take over Charles's identity. He will destroy the blackmail evidence to protect Judith and Ronald, but in exchange, he essentially blackmails them into helping him dispose of the body in the river.
If they help him steal his brother's wealthy life, he will keep their secret.
That is the thrilling, tense narrative as we experience it, scene by scene, line by line. But Carr is playing a massive, fundamental trick on the listener regarding who's actually telling the story.
We have to unpack this final, jaw-dropping twist. At the very beginning of the episode, before the scene in the shop even starts, a narrator sets the stage. The voice says, "This is the story of a man who commits murder and gets away with it. And I know this because I was the murderer." You say, "Oh no," inquires Scotland Yard, "I was the victim." Throughout the entire 30-minute episode, we implicitly assume this regretful narrating voice is Ronald Gilbert, confessing years later to shooting the terrible blackmailer in a moment of passion.
But at the very end of the broadcast, after the body is disposed of, the narrator returns to deliver the closing monologue. And he completely, violently recontextualizes every single thing we just heard. He says, with a hint of a sneer, that Ronald Gilbert thinks he is guilty and will spend the rest of his life agonizing over it. But Ronald never actually shot anybody.
The narrator explains the physical, geometric impossibility of Ronald's shot. He says, "The bullet that killed my brother is supposed to have passed straight through his body and smashed the face of the grandfather clock. But that's a physical impossibility. My brother was a short man. The face of a grandfather clock is much higher than the heart of a man sitting in a chair. A bullet traveling straight through a heart could not angle sharply upward to hit the clock face."
So what actually happened in that chaotic fraction of a second when the gun went off?
2 shots were fired at the exact same millisecond.
Oh, it's so good.
Ronald, fired from the front of the desk, completely missed Markham because his hand was shaking and his wild bullet went high, smashing the clock face. But the narrator fired from the shadowed doorway of the office, hitting Charles Markham perfectly in the heart.
And who is the narrator?
It is Robert, the twin brother. We suddenly realized that the man being blackmailed wasn't just Judith. Robert himself was entirely bankrupt and essentially a financial prisoner to his brother's cruelty. Robert had arrived early.
He was watching the whole time.
He was standing in the dark doorway watching the argument. When Ronald raised his gun, Robert saw his perfect opportunity. He raised his own silenced pistol and fired the fatal shot at the exact same moment. He then silently snuck out the back door, locked it, walked around the block, and strolled in the front door pretending to have just arrived.
He is the cold-blooded murderer who got away with it by letting poor innocent Ronald take the psychological blame and do all the heavy lifting of hiding the body.
It is the ultimate narrative bait and switch. We listen to the entire play completely believing we are sympathizing with a desperate young victim pushed to a crime of passion, only to realize in the chilling final seconds that we have been intimately listening to a highly calculating assassin's proud confession of fratricide.
I marvel at the sheer audacity of this twist. We're listening to the victim tell the story, only to realize at the last second we're listening to the murderer's confession. It completely rewrites the emotional reality of the entire broadcast in one sentence.
And this is the crucial point. This twist is singularly, exquisitely dependent on the medium of audio drama. In a film or a television adaptation, this would be almost impossible to pull off fairly without cheating the audience visually. You would see Robert standing in the doorway with a gun. You would see 2 muzzle flashes. You would see the angle of the bullets hitting the wall.
Right. But in audio, Carr uses the constraints of the medium itself to hide the truth. He gives us the sound of a single, loud gunshot because the 2 shots happened simultaneously and one was silenced. He gives us the frantic dialogue of Ronald claiming he hit him. He forces the listener's brain to construct the visual scene based entirely on Ronald's flawed, panicked perspective.
Exactly.
He allows us to build the room in our heads, which allows Carr to hide the crucial detail, the second shooter, in the massive blind spot of our own imagination.
It's a profound demonstration of why John Dickson Carr's work on suspense is so highly celebrated by mystery scholars. He didn't just lazily adapt his existing novels for the radio by cutting out descriptions. He wrote these scripts specifically for the unique acoustic properties and psychological vulnerabilities of the listening audience.
Masterful.
He understood deeply that when you remove the visual sense, the audience's own imagination becomes the writer's greatest accomplice in deception.
So, after ripping all the floorboards up, what does this all mean? As we bring this deep dive to a close, let's distill the key takeaways from this incredible stack of suspense scripts. What have we learned about the architecture of the impossible?
A lot, I think.
Whether we are looking at the suffocating institutional psychological terror of a vanished cabin on a luxury ocean liner, or the brilliant mechanical ingenuity of a floating glove and a compressed air cannon hidden in an English village, the sheer audacity of a murder by opera glass in a crowded theater, or a brilliant temporal deduction on a doomed airplane car, proves time and again that a truly great mystery isn't about hiding information.
It's really not.
It is a meticulously crafted puzzle box where every single piece is perfectly visible to the naked eye if only you know how to shift your perspective and look at them.
What's truly fascinating to me is the timelessness of that fair play pleasure. These scripts were broadcast over 80 years ago, yet the mechanics of the puzzles are as sharp, as elegant, and as deeply satisfying today as they were to a terrified audience during World War II. In a modern world that is often chaotic, overwhelming, and deeply irrational, there is immense enduring comfort in engaging with a complex problem that has a perfect, logical, and satisfying solution. It's the unique thrill of shouting at the radio or your audio player when you finally figure out the clue involving the luminous paint or the focus wheel just seconds before the detective explains it. It makes you feel brilliant.
Exactly. It's an intellectual high. And for those of you who have had your appetite whetted and want to experience this puzzle box mastery in long form, we highly recommend diving into John Dickson Carr's novels. He wrote dozens of them. You should absolutely start with books like The Hollow Man.
Oh, definitely start with The Hollow Man.
Which is famous because it contains an entire mid-book lecture by the detective explicitly breaking down the different mechanical categories of locked room mysteries. It's practically a textbook on the genre. Then check out The Judas Window, The Crooked Hinge, The Case of the Constant Suicides, and The Problem of the Green Capsule.
All classics.
They are absolute masterclasses in the architecture of the impossible crime and are essential reading for anyone who loves the intersection of spooky Gothic atmosphere and rigorous, inescapable logic.
I completely agree. They are the gold standard of the genre.
I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you go about your week. We live in an incredible era of limitless visual technology. With modern CGI, any monster, any massive explosion, any impossible reality-bending event can be rendered on a screen with flawless, photorealistic perfection. We can literally show the audience anything the mind can conceive.
But does that make it better?
Exactly. Does the restriction of pure audio actually make a thriller more deeply engaging? Because when the writer only gives you sparse dialogue, the rhythmic sound of a ticking grandfather clock and the mournful roar of a ship's foghorn in the night, the most terrifying haunted house and the most impenetrable, bloody locked room must be constructed in the most powerful theater in the world, your own mind.
Beautifully said.
Because when you lock the door from the inside in your imagination, the mystery is truly inescapable. Keep your ears open, keep questioning your assumptions, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.